everyone, welcome back to A Little More Inspired. My name is Blanca. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to hit the follow and subscribe button so that you never miss one of my new episodes. And please don't forget to check out my website, alittlемoreinspired.com, so that you can check out all of my content and all of my recent blog posts. And while you're there, submit your email so that you can get email notifications every time I make a post. I'm very excited to dive into today's episode. I will be going into one of St. Teresa of Avila's most extraordinary works, her book, The Interior Castle. If you've never heard of St. Teresa, please go ahead and check out my last episode where I dive into who she was, where she's from, why I find her so extraordinary, and why her spiritual teachings are relevant today, and why I believe that she is an amazing spiritual teacher for anyone who is looking to dive into their interior world. St. Teresa has a beautiful way of describing the spiritual path. And in that episode, I dive into her life and her journey of finding her spiritual calling, as well as the interior turmoil that she went through before really surrendering to her path. So today we'll just be going into her interior castle, and I will be describing what the book is about, what you can expect in each of the 7 mansions that she describes. I personally feel like the first 3 are the most relevant to just everyday people and where we will find ourselves in throughout our lifetime. So, the interior castle was written in 1577 when St. Teresa was already an established spiritual leader and a key reformer of the Discalced Carmelites. She described the book as a vision given to her by God using the metaphor of a magnificent castle with 7 mansions to illustrate the soul's journey towards divine union. So, in the previous episode, I described what the difference between charisms and talents are, and how talents are different from charisms because charisms are divine gifts that are given to someone who is deeply immersed into their spiritual path. And a lot of times people don't even know that they have them until people start to point them out. And so St. Teresa of Avila, I believe, had a charism of writing and of understanding higher spiritual information. She had a lot of humility within her. So I don't think that initially she would have thought of herself as a writer or to create books that she could sell and, be known for anything. The interior castle was actually encouraged by her fellow nuns and spiritual advisors. She wrote the book in obedience to their requests. Like, they were fascinated by the way that she described the spiritual journey. Just before we go into the mansions and outside of the mansion, here are just some fun facts about the process of St. Teresa creating this masterpiece. She wrote the interior castle during a time of great difficulty. She was under intense scrutiny from the Spanish Inquisition. Mystical experiences were often met with suspicion. So during the Spanish Inquisition, that I believe lasted for about 300 years, and she lived in the half point of that era in Spain, there was a lot of fear of heresy and a lot of fear of anything that wasn't Orthodox Catholic. And also because women weren't really allowed to express their intellectual desires, there was a lot of suspicion for anyone who claimed to have these mystical, profound experiences. She was going through these experiences at a time where her life could be put on in danger for claiming to have these insightful downloads. There was so much happening around faith at that point in history. Additionally, she was dealing with opposition to her Carmelite reforms, facing resistance even from within the church. So, one of the reasons why St. Teresa is considered a doctor of the Christian Catholic Church is because she literally transformed the way that the church understood or practiced isolated prayer or contemplative prayer. I don't think that before she came along or before John of the Cross came along, there was an understanding of contemplative prayer, or what other people would call like deep meditation, like silent meditation, and how that could lead you to deeper levels of consciousness. they feared what they didn't understand yet. So, because St. Teresa was a part of the Carmelite order, originally these nuns were meant to live very monk like lives. They were meant to be totally immersed into their prayers and contemplative prayers. And they had made a vow to release all worldly attachments by making a vow to poverty and to help the poor. And, they were women of service. But when she came in, because it was during the Spanish Inquisition, I believe, from my understanding, I may be wrong, is that a lot of noble women went into these orders as a way to not get married or a safe haven to live out their lives if they were childless. And so a lot of people went in there mostly out of their reputation, for their noble lives. And so still enjoying the wealth of their families. As she was going through these mystical experiences, her desire was to reform the Carmelites to what they were originally intended to, which is again that monk like life of complete surrender to the outside world. To somebody who doesn't understand, this is like their job. So she wanted this order to go back to what the founder had created it to be. And so, again, why she wrote the book, The Interior Castle was meant to be a roadmap for the soul, helping people understand the different levels of spiritual development and the challenges and graces that come with each stage. She specifically wrote it for her fellow nuns, but its wisdom applies to anyone seeking a deeper relationship with God. And that's what I said in my last episode, is that I definitely encourage you to read this book. I think she does such a good job at describing the spiritual awakening and the inner turmoil that people go through once they have had the veil, taken away from their eyes. And I will say that I would start off with her autobiography, A Book of My Life, before you go into the interior castle, so that you can understand a little bit more of her personality and who she was and what she believed, and then go into the interior castle, and also remembering that she is writing to her nuns, she's writing to her sisters. So the book deeply reflects her commitment to her Christian faith. So if you go into the book with an open mind and a desire to learn. And then also, I think it's important to question everything that you read. I have been really sitting in contemplation of everything that she's taught me, because obviously, I think that sometimes people take what they read really literal, and I am seeking to seek the wisdom out of her words. And obviously, as a young woman, I am very much in the world. My experience with my inner contemplative life is going to be very different from hers. So her ideas on suffering, I'm going to be receiving them from different perspectives. I think that when you're reading anything, just have an open mind and try to gain clarity on how it can apply to your life, and not always taking it very literal. So let's go into the interior castle. I'm going to be breaking down the soul when it is outside of the mansion, and I hope you find this information insightful. Again, I don't know anything. You don't have to believe anything I say. This is genuinely something that I just find fascinating, and thought that maybe it could be helpful to anyone who's listening, who maybe wants to know about the book but doesn't want to sit and read it. So this is just my personal breakdown of what I have understood from my understanding. You might read the book and totally get a different message. Okay. So, yeah, so let's dive into where is the soul at when it is outside of the interior castle, or what happens to the individual when the spirit has yet to be activated. So, in the interior castle, St. Teresa of Avila describes the state of the soul before it begins its spiritual journey as being outside of the castle. In this condition, the soul is in a state of spiritual ignorance and totally disconnected from God, surrounded by darkness and unaware of its own beauty and divine potential. Soul has not yet entered the path towards divine union. It may be entirely focused on worldly attachments, sins. I personally struggle with the word sin. I think that maybe because it just creates this sense of immediate shame. I would say for me, sin really means the choices that we make in ignorance, or the choices that we make in fear. Life is about making mistakes and learning from them. and growing and then moving forward. It's your desire to be better and to be good, and your intention behind keeping your integrity to always doing what's right, even when no one's looking, is what really matters. St. Teresa portrays this state as one of blindness, where the soul fails to recognize its true nature as a reflection of God's light. He suggests that some souls remain completely unaware that they are meant to enter the castle. They live only for the external pleasures and never seek spiritual fulfillment. This results in a kind of suffering, not the transformative suffering that leads to growth, but the suffering of being lost without even realizing it. So this is, to me, being outside of the castle is when we are completely asleep. We haven't really even entered a desire for self-reflection. I think that when you come out into this world, it kind of sets you up to live that way, because that's how people can control you. That's how people can tell you who you are. That's how people keep you with low self-esteem, because if they're constantly feeding you this idea that your value comes out from outside of yourself, then you're always going to be like a lost little mouse in a wheel, searching for meaning and not understanding why you can't find it. You can be religious and be outside of the castle, because a lot of people who become religious fanatics who don't really understand that true spirituality is about looking within our own soul and looking within our own mind and growing emotionally, growing spiritually, taking accountability for our actions. And so they hold on to, whatever it is that they can cling to continue to feel superior, because if they're not superior to somebody else, then that means that they would be inferior. And so this is when the soul is very fearful of being inferior to anyone. There is a lot of judgment and prejudice, and I think it's what the world that we're living in right now. I think that a lot of people are living outside of the mansion, not necessarily because they're not part of a religion, but because there's no desire to self-reflect, and there's no desire to look within and say, I want to be different, I want to think differently. And we're all running around following illusions, stories of other people, and we can stay trapped in those stories for so long, until finally you're able to wake up. But with that said, here are some key reasons the soul remains outside of the castle. So the soul can remain outside of the castle because of spiritual ignorance. Many people simply do not know that there is anything beyond the material world. They live their entire lives absorbed in distractions, never questioning if there is something more. They have worldly comforts. The soul clings to things that provide temporary comfort, like wealth, status, relationships, or fleeting pleasures, making them for lasting fulfillment. I always think it's sad when you meet people and you can tell that they feel so self-important because of the things that they own or because of the wealth that they've accumulated. But you can tell deep down that there's like this deep emptiness that reflects from them. Is number three, the unknown. Some might feel a subtle pull towards something greater, but they resist because stepping into the unknown is terrifying. Growth requires letting go, and that can feel like a death to the ego. That's so true. Like when you are going through a spiritual awakening, it is an ego death, because it is really hard for the human being to realize that what they thought was real isn't real, and for it to seek responsibility for the decisions that we make to create our own suffering. Then number four, there's spiritual apathy or doubt. Others have been exposed to spirituality but remain indifferent or skeptical. They may have had negative religious experiences or believe that deep spiritual transformation isn't real or isn't meant for them. This is something that I've been contemplating recently a lot, because I was watching this documentary about this lady who created a church where she had convinced people that the way to salvation was through being skinny. It's on HBO, but I was thinking to myself, how do people convince the masses of following them with all of this nonsense? And she had created so many churches and like had brainwashed so many people. I think it ended up being like some kind of cult. Number five is because of pain and trauma. Some souls stay outside the castle because of past wounds. They may have been hurt by religious institutions, betrayed by others, or feel abandoned by God. Instead of moving towards healing, they shut down. Sometimes I feel like in the Christian doctrines, this teaching of like that we suffer because we're inherently bad people, or because like we don't ever do anything good. And so when you're constantly told that you're going to go to a bad place anyways, people give up. You kind of kill their morality. And so I feel like I haven't really understood my faith until I went and learned about it on my own, in my own isolation, in my own contemplation, with asking God to reveal to me the truth. Sometimes we blame God for our suffering instead of asking God to help us get through to things, and understanding that suffering comes with the package of just being a human being. You're here to learn, and you're here to grow, and you're here to go through ups and downs. And that's something that just comes with the evolution of our life. And asking God to help us move through suffering so that we can learn from it, so that we can grow from it, so that we can become better people is very different than approaching religion or spirituality as like, I have to be perfect so that I never suffer. You know what I mean? Like, you can be perfect and you can do everything that these religious rules say. You're never going to be perfect, that you're a human being who's flawed, and that but you're still lovable, and you're still worthy of being seen and appreciated for who you are, and that God loves you so much and he wants to see you be your best self, but he wants you to grow through accountability without being afraid of or feeling that shame when you do make a mistake, because okay, you made a mistake, but you can grow from that. And lastly, the reason why we stay out of the castle is deception by the enemy. Saint Teresa warns that dark forces, temptations, inner voices of doubt, or external influence will do everything they can to keep the soul from entering the castle. They whisper that the journey is pointless and that the soul is unworthy, or that the world has everything it needs. That's so true. Like, but that's because of the conditioning that we've been had by people. The world has convinced us that we are unworthy of that deep, unconditional love because of people's fears. I think that sometimes we do have to hit rock bottoms to seek that inner guidance. I wish that we didn't have to hit rock bottoms, but sometimes that's the only thing that breaks people open to knowing that the outside world isn't actually what's going to truly fulfill you. So here are reasons why the soul suffers while it's outside of the castle before it's ever awakened. The suffering of the soul outside of the castle is unique because it is the suffering of separation from its true self, from God, and from the peace that comes from that spiritual awareness. The soul outside of the castle is never truly at peace, even if it has everything in the world, even if you have all of the wealth, all of the friends, all of the popularity. There is an emptiness that the soul feels at this stage. There's always a feeling that something is missing, almost like nothing is ever enough. And so, ironically, the suffering can either push the soul towards awakening, or it can begin to search for answers, or it can cause it to remain trapped in despair and looking for numbness or endless distractions. So there's so many ways that the soul can go in this place. Here are some reasons why some souls never enter the castle. Number one, they don't realize they can. Some people never awaken to the possibility of a deeper life. They remain outside the castle, unaware that they are called to something greater. We're here on a journey to be a human being, to grow and to learn. I believe that there is a paradise after this lifetime. Some people believe that, you come back here and you do it all over again until you get it right. And even then, I'm like, I don't want to come back here if I don't have to, because life is hard. So you want to learn the lessons, you want to grow as an individual, you want to prepare your spirit to move on to a greater knowing and a greater understanding so that you don't repeat your suffering, so that you can help others from what you've learned through the wisdom of your suffering. Entering the castle requires detachment from worldly desires, and some people simply aren't willing to let go. They may fear losing control, security, or identity. I think that when you're living in a place where you're really attached to the worldly things, I think that when I was asleep, I used to think, wow, those people look so happy. but now I realize that like they don't seem happy to me anymore. And I think it's kind of sad if this world is what your paradise is. And I think that you won't really understand that until you've had your awakening. You might listen to me right now and think, what the hell is she talking about? And maybe it's not your time to understand that, you know. And she says that a lot too throughout her book. St. Teresa says that God will give you clarity when you're ready, or when your soul has evolved enough to understand what it is that she's talking about. But if you're not ready, if you're still in pride, or if you're still, you know, attached to the things that you are, then you're not ready yet. And only you and God will know when that time is right. Number three is they fear change. Spiritual transformation requires a willingness to change, and that can feel threatening, the familiar. Some people have been wounded or betrayed so deeply that they shut themselves off from spiritual exploration. Their heart becomes closed and they reject any divine invitation. If you're somebody who's been deeply hurt and you feel like that's the only way that you can move through life, I think I have a lot of compassion for those people, and I totally understand why they feel like they have to self protect. I think it's sad when people cast spells upon us through their words or through their abusive nature, and then they change our heart, because sometimes we could be very naturally kind, but somebody did something to us that closed up our heart, and then we never wanted to let anyone in. And I hope that if you are somebody who has been hurt, to not let those people change you, because that's what they want. People who are healed and people who have an awareness of the love that's within them, they want to see people also recognize that state that's within them as well. And that the bad things that have happened to you don't have to define your life and who you are in the way that you receive the world, because we can't control the people outside of us. We can't control why they do the things they do to us, but we can control how we receive it and the way that we allow it to affect our nature. Finally, how can the soul enter the castle? For those who begin to sense their own spiritual hunger, the process of entering the castle starts with number one, awareness, realizing that there's something more and acknowledging that the world alone does not satisfy you. Number two, I really like number two, it's humility. Saint Teresa talks about humility throughout all of her book. She says that's the only way to maintain the awareness, the gifts that you are given by God as you move through the mansions. How you continue in your path is by holding on to your humility, letting go of that pride of feeling like you know everything. Humility is the number one way of entering the castle. It's being able to look within and say, I don't know what it is that I'm doing. I don't know why I feel so empty inside, but I want to find genuine fulfillment. Recognizing that we need divine guidance and cannot reach enlightenment through willpower alone. And number three, through prayer and reflection, beginning a conversation with God, even if it's just in the form of seeking the truth. I feel like I say that a lot to anybody who I've ever had a conversation with. I'm not going to tell you to go to church. I think that I go to church now, not because I want to go be friends with people. I want to go to church now because it's another way to you know, dedicate time to him. But a lot of people go to church and people hurt them. And then they're like, I don't believe in God, because if God was real, then those people wouldn't have treated me badly. I don't know how to pray yet. I don't think there's like a perfect way to pray. I think at first it's just a conversation of like, for me, it was like I got on my knees and I was like, if there's anything out there that is real, like I need help. I don't know what it is that I'm doing. I don't want to be here anymore. And I started looking at YouTube videos and kind of went down a rabbit hole of Oprah Winfrey. And then her chats with these spiritual teachers led me to A Seat to the Soul and to the Power of Now. The spiritual process is a whole journey. It is not an overnight experience. It is not, I just read this and all of a sudden I'm saved. That's not, it doesn't work that way. It is a process to completely surrender your heart. It is a process to realize that you have to change. It is a process to emotionally mature. It is a effort that we have to give, and God will help us transform because he knows that that's what we want. And he'll send us the right people at the right time, and he'll send us the right books, and eventually it will lead you to the truth. But I'm not going to tell you to go to church and that's where you'll find God. I'm sure that a lot of religious people will want me to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you personally, it was through reading, through self-examination, through listening to things that resonated my mind and started to change my inner beliefs that I started to grow internally. So pray in your home, in your room, pray for guidance and pray for the right things to come and for the truth to illuminate your mind because you genuinely want to change for yourself, not for anybody else, not for your parents, not for your boyfriend, not for your sister or your for yourself. That you want to change, you want to be a better person because you want to live a more peaceful life. Watch God start to illuminate that path for you. And there is no rush to get there there is no final destination. It is a lifelong process, but it can be totally transformative and help you heal so many things within you that you didn't even know needed to be examined. So I'm sorry, I kind of go on tangents here, but I like to add my thoughts. So, five is detachment, slowly letting go of what no longer serves the soul's highest good. Yeah, learning detachment, I think, is something that you learn a lot in the Buddhist teachings as well. We hold on to things really tightly. We hold on to our wounds really tightly. We hold on to our beliefs really tightly. I feel like right now in America, one attachment that I see in a lot of people is the attachment to political views. Personally, because I'm first gen, I don't really have an attachment to either political party because, I don't have a history with any of them. But I have noticed that people who have maybe been here generations, they have an attachment to being Republican or an attachment to being a Democrat. And they hold on to that because they feel like it's a sense of identity for them. They don't even examine the core values of those people just because they believe that, like, well, this is what my family has always been, so this is what I have to be. They follow things blindly without ever questioning it. If you were born like in a really religious group, which I think the foundation of whatever your parents feed into you is important, but I also think it's important that at a certain age your parents let you go and allow you a journey to finding that faith within yourself and what it means for you and your relationship with God. But sometimes we hold on to things so tightly without ever questioning it, even if it's hurting us or if it's hurting other people. I don't know, I also believe that obviously people can have good intentions. And even what I'm saying right now, you don't have to follow anything that I say. If it doesn't resonate, don't listen to me. Like, run away. Like, I don't want to give you anything that leads you down the wrong path. What I want mostly is for people to look within their own spirit, to look within their own heart, and to find the answers that God wants for their life, for them to find that within themselves. I don't want you to follow me, and I don't want you to believe anything that I say if it's not that. And lastly, how you can enter the castle is through courage. Take the first step into the unknown, trusting that God will guide the way. There is an intelligence out there that created the moon, the stars, the planets, the oceans, and all the animals and us, and that He can give you the path that will fulfill your heart's deepest desires. And He can give that to you if you're just willing to seek Him for those answers. Sometimes when you're going in the spiritual journey, you have to pretend that it's you and God for a while. It took me 6 years to get to where I am now, and it was a process, and it was sometimes painful, and I made a lot of mistakes throughout the way. I'm still trying to figure it out as well. So Saint Teresa makes it clear that God never abandons a soul even when it remains outside the castle. The invitation to enter is always present. You are always able to ask God to help you. And He's always there with you, even in your darkest moments. I will say that sometimes we think that God's illumination is like kind of like gonna be something that you hear with like no like a voice that you hear. It's not like that. God's guidance comes in very subtle ways. It's something that sparks your interest. Um, Sometimes something that someone says, a curiosity to learn more about a certain topic, uh, even sometimes like a sign that you see or a license plate driving by. God sends you signs that way. but you have to have the courage to listen to those pings and let go of the attachments of what you're holding on to, because you can't move towards the new door if you're still holding on to the old door very tightly. You have to let go of that door and freely enter that new door with a sense of bravery. Be prepared for grief. I didn't have anything to really reference, but I will say that when I first decided that I wanted to change and that I needed help, everything around me crashed and burned. But prepare for the grief that happens when everything does walk away. Just don't stay stuck there. Continue to search for knowledge and continue to seek the truth and integrate everything that you're learning, because you can learn a lot of spiritual knowledge and never change if you don't integrate what it is that you're learning. And I think that a lot of the times that's why people fall into deception of bad leaders or people that don't mean them well, because sometimes people are looking for an overnight save or an overnight healing, and it doesn't work that way. Like, healing is eternal, honestly, because most of the things that we're healing are beliefs that have been ingrained in us since we were children. Now we're going to learn about the first three mansions. And like I said at the beginning, I will be going into deeper depth into these three, because this is where I believe most of us will be in our lifetime. In the book, she talks about how the interior castle is a diamond that is within all of us, and that diamond six is your soul, and within the soul there are seven mansions, and there isn't like a hierarchy of how where they are. They're just mansions that you have to get through to get to the center of the diamond. At the center of the diamond is God's conscious, his essence, his light. It is deep in there. And everyone has one. Everybody has that diamond inside of them. The deeper you go into the diamond and the deeper you go into each mansion and conquer the mansion and move on to the next, the closer you get to God's conscious, the closer you get to that light. But when you are outside of the mansion, there is no light touching you. You can't see the light. You can't even hear it. The 4 through 7 are more supernatural mansions, and it takes truly mastering the first three to be able to reach those. And as I learned more about those mansions, they are very intimidating, and it's very difficult to get into those mansions, and you have to have totally mastered a sense of detachment of the world. All good things come at a price. Saint Teresa talks about mansions 4 through 7 coming with a responsibility and the experiences that people in mansions 4 through 7 might have. And you might think, oh, I want to have that experience, but without realizing just how deeply that person had to detach from the world to be able to reach that kind of awareness. Every mansion comes with a different set of responsibilities and a different set of triggers and a different set of temptations that are pulling the soul back to ignorance and a soul back to chaos. You have to master each mansion to move to each new mansion. The first three mansions are considered purgatory. Saint Teresa of Avila describes the first three mansions as a kind of spiritual purgatory, while the soul has entered the castle and begun its journey towards God. It remains weak, struggling with distractions, temptations, and worldly attachments. These early stages require purification, making them a necessary but challenging part of spiritual growth. I was telling somebody that when I had my first spiritual awakening and saw my whole life, you know, flash in front of my eyes, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I finally get it. I finally could see all of the decisions that I made." I kind of thought that life would be perfect after that. Like I'd finally, you know, realized what life is all about. And I slowly came to realize that I had really just opened up Pandora's box to all of the healing that I needed to do and how deeply immature I was. And I took an emotional intelligence class, and I learned about the concept of arrested development. No, the veil had been removed from my eyes, and I realized that I was totally responsible for my life. and that I needed to stop looking for other people to save me, I realized that there was so much growth that needed to happen. I was 27 at the time. My emotional development wasn't at that age. I feel like the spiritual journey is not just about growing with God, but it's also about moving towards a sense of mental maturity. Because in my emotional intelligence class says that when we are really traumatized, or we are deeply in arrested development, he says that your soul is like an adult and then your maturity is like a child. And so you want your spirit to be childlike, but you want your maturity to be an adult. As you grow spiritually and emotional intelligence development, you want to switch that. You want to go from the spirit of a child where you're free, where you're less fearful, and you bring joy to the rooms that you're in, but with the maturity of the age that you are, and the maturity of an adult. And those are all learned skills. One thing I've encountered a lot in people who I've thought are kind of immature is that they're like, well, I'm just like that. I This is how I am. Like, you have to accept me. No, actually, you're not just like that. You can change. It is an effort to mature the mind. Maybe if you weren't given the foundation of your parents raising you with good emotional hygiene, you can learn that. There's literally millions of books that teach you. There's lots of places that you can learn to move through your limiting beliefs. If you don't seek to change and you don't seek to grow, then you're always going to stay where you are. Why the first three mansions are called purgatory mansions, or so in these stages the soul is still in its infancy. It's still very spiritually weak. It's still very influenceable. That's why Saint Teresa says that when you start to walk through the mansions, it's important to find mentors or friends that are also on the spiritual journey, because you kind of can help each other stay on track and encourage each other to keep going. Because the soul is still in its infancy, you're still surrounded by the people that were with you before you awakened. So all of those people are still asleep. In these stages, there is a desire to not fully leave the old life. And so if you're not around people who are inspired by your growth, they might get triggered that you're growing or that you're changing, or they might try to keep you in a stagnant place. So, and then also, like, you're still growing, you're barely hearing or feeling the light yet. Number two is a state of cleansing and purification. Just as purgatory is the place where souls are purified before entering heaven, these three mansions serve as a stage where the soul begins to purge itself of sins, attachments, and false desires. This purification process can be quite painful, as the soul gradually detaches from what no longer serves its spiritual growth. So, this is where the person or the individual starts to take inventory of what decisions it's been making. The person is like really becoming self aware, they're self reflecting, and they're like, it can be quite overwhelming when you realize, wow, like, hello, the problem is me. That one Taylor Swift song about realizing that she's the problem. So that can be quite hard. And I think that that's why a lot of people avoid this kind of work, because they don't have the humility to self reflect yet. In the first three mansions, it's a lot about self reflection, self awareness, self reflection. What am I doing to contribute to my own suffering? But in the first three, it still relies mostly on its own effort rather than fully surrendering to divine grace. This makes spiritual growth feel like an uphill battle, much like purgatory, where the soul longs for divine closeness but must endure purification. So, a time of inner turmoil and spiritual warfare, the soul encounters temptations, distractions, and doubts that make prayer and spiritual progress feel exhausting. This struggle mirrors the suffering of purgatory, where the soul longs for God but must first be purified. I definitely felt this because I was really young. I just moved to California and I was making lots of new friends. And even though I was very passionate about my growth, I also was really passionate about having a good time. And so I did find that inner turmoil of like, I want to hang out with my friends. I want to go to this party. I want to like go be a part of a community. And so sometimes I feel like the reason why I didn't progress in some of these mansions during my younger years was because I was struggling with wanting to be in the world and be a young person and have fun, and then also knowing that like I needed to make my spiritual life a priority. And I think that for the most part I did try to balance those two out as much as I could, because I was also taking emotional intelligence classes and trying to grow as an individual. But, when I got to a certain point of my growth, the outside world, it felt very painful to be there. Like being at parties was, I could start to see more of the superficiality, of the fakeness that really created a lot of internal pain for me. And so eventually you do get to a place where you're like, well, I have to leave these things behind because this call is becoming stronger. Here's a breakdown of the first three mansions as purgatory. In the first mansion is the first awakening. This is called awakening to God's presence. The soul enters the castle but remains full of distractions and worldly attachments. Prayer feels difficult and spiritual awareness is still weak. We're still very much blind here. There is a desire to be good in the first mansion, though. We finally have a sense of humility where we are desiring to be less selfish and to be so me. But there is a lot of work to be done in this mansion. This is also called the mansion of self knowledge. This is where the person is starting to only now desiring to look at why they do the things that they do, questioning their ideas and their beliefs. So here she says that you can't see the light yet. The light is still not touching you, but you can somewhat hear it. There's like a little like a little noise that is calling you, and you are becoming curious to that noise. The second mansion is called the mansion of struggle and temptation. The soul begins seeking God more intentionally, but struggles with doubts, temptations, and discouragement. Spiritual progress feels inconsistent. I think that from my self reflection, I think that I'm either in the end of the second mansion, maybe now entering the third. As you learn more about the second mansion, I could see that reflection within me, that struggle between faith and doubt. Sometimes I would be so in my prayers, I would feel so connected to God. I would feel like, oh my God, I totally feel like everything is going to be okay. Something would happen, somebody would say something to me, and I would be like, oh my God, I'm doomed. None of this is real. I'm not making any progress, not changing. I'm still a hot mess. Constantly go from this like teeter tottering, being super devoted in my faith. I'm surrendered. I trust what God has for me. None of this is real. Like, I don't even know what's happening, and just completely crumble and crash and have like crash outs. I feel like I understand Mansion 2 really well. And when you enter the third mansion, this is when you have spiritual discipline. The soul develops a more disciplined prayer life and spiritual practices, yet pride and self sufficiency can creep in, leading to stagnation. Complacency becomes a danger. These three mansions prepare the soul for deeper intimacy with God by stripping away ego, attachments, and illusions. While this phase is difficult, it is essential for the soul to grow in humility, perseverance, and trust in God's grace. Once the soul moves past this purgatorial stage, it begins to experience true inner transformation, where prayer becomes more profound, worldly desires lose their grip, and God's presence becomes more tangible. Saint Teresa emphasizes that these early stages require a commitment to prayer, self discipline, and perseverance through struggles. She encourages souls to stay focused, avoid complacency, and continue seeking deeper union with God, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. I personally feel like all of the work that I've done, I feel like I'm finally in a place where I possibly have reached Mansion 3. I'm not sure. And if I have, I'm definitely at the beginning stages. I think I just entered that mansion like a day ago. The last 6 years, I did struggle with a lot of inner turmoil, but where I am now feels really good. All of that struggle and all of the lessons that I went through was worth the wholeness that I feel now. That even when it gets hard, because healing isn't linear. Sometimes you feel like, wow, I've definitely healed, I've matured, I'm in a good place mentally. And then somebody comes along and triggers you and you freaking crash and you're again in despair and feeling doubt if any of this is real. The goal is to just get up. Okay, well, that sucked. I have to try again. I have to keep going. When you do have those crashes of doubt and fear, the length of them is shorter. At the beginning of my spiritual journey, my crash outs were much longer. I would have these moments of feeling really encouraged and in my faith, made a lot of internal progress. And then, something would happen where I was still grieving things, and then I would feel like I was depressed again. I didn't know if what I was doing was even real. And but then, like, when I would get up again and try to connect again to God and to keep going and to keep learning and to keep reading, the progress the next time was much further. You're going through moments of purification where you're starting to realize all the chaos that's in your life, and you might trigger a lot of people because, again, they don't want to see you grow, or start to have more compassion for people. But you also start setting like better boundaries with people, and you realize, like, these people aren't good for me. So even though I feel love for them and I can understand why they do the things that they do, where they are in life isn't right for where I want to go. And you're able to like close that door. And even though you might grieve them and it hurts, you're able to stay in that strength of like, I need to keep going because I know that this is what God wants for me, and like this is my purpose, is to grow and to leave behind anything, not in a selfish way, but because sometimes leaving behind what isn't working, or sometimes people don't want to grow with you. And the most loving thing that you can do is to allow them to be where they are. And so, yeah, like I think that as we enter and dive deeper into each mansion, just know that this process is not easy. It is kind of hard. But it does get easier over time, and life gets better over time. And not necessarily because you gain things from the world. Personally, I have gotten to a really good place internally, spiritually, but I still struggle in the world. I'm not like somebody who has mastered this world and is super, making the big bucks and is like gonna tell you this is how to live out your dreams and make all of the money you want and find the boyfriend. That's not what I'm here to share with you. I think that I'm here to share with you how to seek that internal peace, whether you're living with all of your wishes on the outside world coming true, or you're just a regular person who is doing their best to survive. But how can I find peace and joy, contentment wherever it is that I am? I think that that is what I want to share, and why I think that I believe The Interior Castle is such an amazing book, and why I want to break it down, because you can find that internal peace in wherever you are in life. So yeah, this is an overall intro of what the Interior Castle is, an overview of what the soul is struggling with when it is outside of the mansion. And in this next video, I will be going into each of the mansions and going into what the individual is experiencing, what they are moving through in their life lessons, and what they are fighting in their doubts and their fears, and in their temptations to go back to ignorance. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first episode. So bye, guys.